So now we can start our official session on troubleshooting. And this is a very important session. And I definitely have coworkers and have had coworkers that don't believe you can teach troubleshooting. I fully disagree. And I believe that as long as you know the correct steps on how to approach a problem, you can work towards fixing it. And so we're trying to give you today just a skeleton on how to face most problems that you're going to find in an IT support specialist position. And from the extra knowledge that you gain with us through your experiences, that's when troubleshooting becomes easier and you can move through steps a little more quickly. So let's get into it. As always, we have objectives and I'm already tired. So let's get Aster to take this first slide for us.
All right. Troubleshooting objectives. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Describe how to effectively troubleshoot using the 6 steps of the troubleshooting methodology. Use the troubleshooting steps and methodology to diagnose a motherboard issue.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
So our big takeaway from this presentation are going to be those 6 steps to troubleshooting. And you will need to know this for the A+, but it's also just a good tool to have in your mental tool belt. All right, in our key BSMs, Joseph, will you read this slide for me? I believe you are muted, Joseph.
Yeah, it is. Key BSMs, behavior skill, communication, mindset, persistence.
Perfect, thank you. So as with all IT fundamentals, really, having good communication skills is just key in order to succeed. And when I say communication, I'm talking about you interacting with the client, asking these really strong questions to narrow down what our problem actually is. And having good communication skills will make this process go significantly faster. And then, as always, we want to be persistent because sometimes you're going to have clients that are not going to want to work as well with you as others. So it's important to stay persistent and push through those difficult times. All right, Stephen, give us our definition of troubleshooting.
Troubleshooting is a logical form of problem solving. When troubleshooting is applied to a computer or any kind of technology, it is a process of using logical problem solving to fix a reported failure.
Perfect, thank you. So we're just logically going to try to approach a problem and go step by step at trying to narrow down what the problem actually is. All right. So I have another little link for you. If you guys will go ahead and click on that, you should be able to, if you click File, make a copy, you'll have your own copy of this. This is good for taking notes for this session. In the step side of things, that's where you're going to put your different steps that we're going through. And throughout the presentation, you'll see things that'll say troubleshooting rule number 1, rule number 2. If it is a step, it will be labeled as step and the number. If it is a rule, it'll be labeled as troubleshooting rule and the number. And so there's 6 steps total. You don't have to write down your rules because it's provided for you. I would recommend writing in your steps and any additional information that you want to add for each step or for the rules, you can include it in the right-hand box. Any questions? Should be pretty clear from the documentation. So our first rule in troubleshooting, before we begin actually doing anything, we want to approach the problem systematically. As Cynthia said, we want to do systematically. We want to try to narrow it down from the easiest solution to the most difficult, because most of the time it's going to be an easy fix. And it's always a lot easier, let's say, if you're suspecting that your computer isn't getting enough power, it's always easier to make sure that the power supply is actually plugged in to the wall rather than taking the power supply out of the computer itself and checking to see if it might be one of the connectors. Right. So there are only 3 kinds of issues. Karen, will you read them for us? Julian, don't start.
There are only 3 kinds of issues. 1, user error. 2, software failure. 3, hardware failure.
Perfect, thank you. Kelly has another error that he'd like to add in.
Oh man, I can't even remember on top of my head. But which one was it?
The user error,
The
ID.
user? Oh, the ID10T? Yeah.
Yep.
We've talked about that.
Yeah, okay.
The
So
ID10T error, which of these do you think is the most common? User, software, or hardware?
Human.
User.
Human error.
human error, user
Hands
error.
down, user is hands down your most common by a pretty large margin.
Absolutely. It is almost always going to be a user error. So approaching this systematically can help you prevent a lot of extra work on your part. DW is always the problem. I feel you, DW. All right, so our first step, we're going to identify the problem. So in your little document that I sent out, in that step 1, you're going to include identify the problem. So we need to figure out what our problem actually is, which makes sense. You can't really solve a problem if you don't know what it is. And included within this step, we're going to be interviewing the client and backing up data, which is kind of included in our troubleshooting rule 4. So we're actually going to move past that. All right. And we're going to go into these really solid questions that you can ask your client. So Susan, will you take the first 2?
Okay. Please describe the problem. What error messages, usual displays, or failures did you see? Or when did the problem start?
Yes. So ask them to describe the problem. Error message is key. And what signs of failure did they see? And when did the problem start? That is Those are the first two questions you are almost always going to ask. When did the problem start? Describe your problem. Julian, take the next three.
The third one is, what was the situation when the problem occurred? What programs or software were you using? And what changes have recently been made to the system?
Perfect, thank you. So what were you doing to cause the problem, essentially? The programs and software that they're using is super important to know, and what changes have been made to the system. If you've just upgraded your RAM and all of a sudden you're having issues, it's probably something to do with your RAM. And that's something that could be narrowed down pretty quickly just by being told, yeah, they upgraded my RAM recently, or they put in a new hard drive, or they just swapped out the power supply unit. You know, that gives you an area to start in. All right, Vincent, will you read the next three?
Has there been a recent thunderstorm or electrical problem? Have you made any hardware, software, or configuration changes? Has someone else used your computer recently?
Perfect. So if there are electrical issues, asking about weather is a relevant question. And with the question, what changes have recently been made to the system, you could go into further questioning about hardware, software, or configuration changes. And then has someone else used your computer recently? That is a common problem in the corporate environment where you share computers with other workmates. If you work the morning shift, you might have someone that comes in and uses your computer in the afternoon. They might have their own account, but they're still using the same computer, so they could be changing monitor settings. And Kelly has a pretty good story with that, I believe. Is it you, Kelly, or Marvin?
What about the changing the monitor settings?
Yeah, with
Well, it was
having
actually
to
having to replace. That was Diego's story.
okay.
Where he was working at UPS, and every time he came in there, the colors were all messed up, and they started replacing the monitors. And it just turned out the person who was on night shift was partially colorblind, and they had to, so they readjusted the colors every time they would come in so that they could actually read the screens properly. And this was going on for like about a week or two before they realized that they went through several monitors. They finally realized it was just a guy changing the settings. So IT couldn't figure out what was causing the problem, and then finally it dawned on them that the settings were being changed.
Yeah, and something as simple as asking, you know, has someone else used your computer, can help you, you know, narrow that down. And you know, from there, you know, I'm not going to just assume, oh, the other person must be colorblind. I might go and ask them, hey, have you noticed any issues with the monitor during your shift? And he'd probably
warmer
go,
colors.
yeah, whatever. Because there's nothing wrong with changing those settings as long as you can still, you know, do your work. But yeah, just helps you narrow it down. All right, and then finally, our last two questions. Lorraine, will you take those? Lorraine, we can't hear you if you are talking.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The mic keeps defaulting back. I don't know why, because I don't know when it does it, but sorry about that.
Oh, you're good.
I'm sorry, you said the last two questions?
Yes,
Peggy?
ma'am.
What valuable data on your system has not been backed up? And how might I recreate what you were doing when the problem occurred?
Perfect. So before you do any work on a system, you make sure that they back up everything. We do not start working on any device without performing a backup. If that information is lost, that falls back on you, the tech. So making sure that they back up their information is crucial. And then asking about how to recreate the problem is a good last question for you to get started in that troubleshooting. Because then you can, if you can recreate it, you can see, okay, this is a user error because they should have, you know, when they were setting up their device, they accidentally selected English UK versus English US, and they just clicked the wrong language keyboard. And that could be the problem. It could be as simple as that. And so going through and just making sure that they've done everything that how they're supposed to will help you figure out those user errors pretty quickly, or if it is actually a software or hardware issue. Yes, Cynthia.
So are these like 10 questions like really solid as far as like I would say like 100% like can troubleshoot like most problems that occur in real life? Like what is the percentage? Like I mean these are really good 10 questions, but and I want to like use this as like my Bible in a way, but I'm not really religious or anything like that, but like something that I hold golden basically.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So as always, it depends. And basically these are good questions to get you started. So they're broad and they get you started having that conversation with the client and trying to narrow it down. And you know, when they tell you when did the problem start? Okay, it started this morning. All right. Has anyone else used your computer recently? No, but we actually just moved buildings. And from there, you can ask more narrow questions. Like, so from there, I probably wouldn't be asking, you know, let's see, what programs or software were you using? Because we would already be at the point where, okay, the device has been moved from across the building. So probably something got shaken, it's not plugged in right, or like there's something wrong with a wall outlet. Those are the questions I'm going to be focusing more on at that point. So they're just used to help isolate it. Exactly, Cynthia. Right. So our troubleshooting. What was that?
I said thank you, Dr.
Oh, yeah. Troubleshooting rule number 2, establish your priorities. So figure out what the problem is, what questions are more important to ask when you're narrowing down. And as always, beware of the user error. It is very frequently going to be a user error. So we don't, even if Kelly is my client and Kelly knows way more than I do about most of this information, I'm still going to go through these steps as if Kelly has zero experience. I'll use better language when talking to him because I know he understands the language, but I'm still going to ask, is it plugged in? Because it's very likely that Kelly just forgot to plug it in, or accidentally, when he was moving his computer, pulled it a little too far and it came loose from the outlet or from the power supply. anything like that can cause the issue. And it's not because, you know, Kelly doesn't understand computers. It's because these things happen. It's a human error.
And sometimes we get in a rush and we forget things. We
Mhm.
forget to check things. We forget to look at, forget to realize cables have two sides.
It is very likely that it will happen to you. So it's okay. Because if it's a user error, that doesn't mean the person is dumb or doesn't understand things. It's just, it's a human error and we all make it, and we all probably will continue to make it throughout our lives. So we just treat them with respect and everything will be okay. All right, and then troubleshooting rule number 4, ask about data, always back up data. You always, 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 always have them back it up. And you have them confirm and reconfirm that they have backed up their data, because you don't want this to fall on you when they decided for whatever reason to not back it up and then something goes wrong. And that also falls back on, if you're taking good notes and you, like, as you're going through, ask client to back up data, reconfirm that client backed up data. And then when they submit a thing saying they didn't have me back up my data, I lost all this information, you can say, no, right here, this is when I asked that they back data, I had them reconfirm, and they said that they did. So that off of the playing field if you can. All right, step number 2. So this is one that you want to write down. Examine the system and develop a theory. So you're going to take a look at it and try to come up with your hypothesis of sorts. Develop a theory. And actually, I would recommend not saying hypothesis for the time being, because A+ will refer to it as developing a theory. So make sure you're using that language, so that way when you do see this on a test, you'll know exactly what it's talking about.
So we're not going to get into the whole hypothesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Yeah, no.
No, okay, got it.
All right, so troubleshooting rule number 5, divide and conquer. So if you have multiple problems, try to solve the simplest first. And also sometimes when you have multiple problems, it's really only one problem. And if you solve that one, it kind of fixes the rest of the problems, such as turn the system off and on again. That hard reboot is sometimes all it takes to fix all those little problems that you're facing.
And if the problem is the user?
Educate.
Well done.
See, you never stop being a learner, guys. Your instructor will follow you around for the rest of your life, testing you as you go.
And torment you. Yeah, we have a tendency to track people down on LinkedIn and new jobs, all that kind of fun stuff, you know.
That's good, Kelly. At least someone's looking out.
All right, troubleshooting rule number 6, make no assumptions. That goes back to my example with Kelly. I know Kelly really understands this technology. I am not going to assume that Kelly was smart enough to plug it in on both sides. We make no assumptions. We start from 0, work our way up. As they say, we don't assume, because it makes a blank out of you and me, as they say. I'm being recorded, so we're keeping it PG.
until we get to printers.
till we get to printers. Then we don't record any of it, so that way we can say what's really on our minds. All right, troubleshooting rule number 7. Try the simple things first. Always try the simple things first. That it's as simple as it sounds. You want to knock the easiest solutions out of the way, so that way you're not spending hours on a project that could be fixed simply by a hard reset. And we want to think about the least invasive, which means not having to go into the actual computer, and then slowly going deeper and deeper as needed. What is my approach when a client just doesn't really let you help? You do what you can and you document. And at some point, you can push it up the ladder. And if it depends on what you mean by doesn't let you help, if they're being rude and like berating you and all that, you're going to move them on, because you're not getting paid to take that sort of clientele. That's your manager's job. And if you've done everything you can and they're just refusing to do the things you're asking them to do, you document it and you pass it along. Yeah, clients will, there will be clients that do that, and you help them to the best of your abilities, but they, it's a case by case thing, Julian, and it just kind of depends. As always, it depends. All right. So then we want to follow this process to form a best theory and then test that theory. So you could put this on the third column if you would like, but you want to reproduce the problem and observe for yourself what the client described. You want to decide if the problem is hardware or software, and then you want to make your best theory as to what the source of the problem is. So you're going to try to reproduce it, decide if it's hardware, software, and then once you figure out if it's one of those, try to narrow it down and come up with what you think is the problem. After that, we'll attempt to solve it. If that doesn't work, we'll redo this process and try to figure out what the actual source of our problem is. All right. Troubleshooting rule number 8, become a researcher. Google should be your best friend by the end of this. If you do not know, Google it.
Or
Ask a
DuckDuckGo.
coworker.
It's fine.
Whatever your choice of research is, do it. Can you
Just
can you
trying to
Yahoo
let
it?
people know? Well, probably not, because Yahoo would just refer back to Google. Just trying to let people know there's other options out there. You could ask Jeeves.
Ask Jeeves.
Yeah.
There's the Genie one where you can ask it 20 questions. That might help.
Yeah.
I don't know. At the very least, I recommend Google. What you do outside of that, that's on you. But become a researcher. I'll always be, trying to. Don't be afraid of a challenge, because you'll definitely see problems that you might not necessarily know how to fix. And don't be afraid to attempt them. And if you know it's way over your head, then you might want to pass it on, but at least give it a good shot. Make a solid attempt at it, do research, and do your best to solve it. Right. And now we have 5 questions. So Let's see, I'll stop sharing.
So step 3. So first step, identify the problem. 2, establish a theory. Step 3, test your theory. Because we want to be sure what we think the problem is actually the problem. We don't want to be treating symptoms, working along that way. We want to try to find the root cause and treat that. So rule 9, write things down. Documentation is key. For those of you who were here this morning, I failed to write things down last Friday. And so this morning, I couldn't remember exactly which labs we needed to finish up because I failed to write things down. Documentation is critical because if people come behind you, they'll know what you have already tried. So there is no double work going on, because some problems are not real quick and easy to fix. It's a multi-step process. Sometimes the troubleshooting aspect can take days. And you want to have clear, concise documentation of what it is your theories were, what you did to test it, and what fixes you may have tried. Rule 10, don't assume the worst. Client comes in, I can't find my file. Don't offer him your condolences right off the bat and say, I'm sorry, your hard drive is fried. Do what you can. Try all the processes first before you assume that either the computer is dead, the motherboard, or some expensive component is just fried. Make sure to thoroughly test it before you make those assumptions. And again, always start with the least invasive first and work your way in. Rule number 11, reboot, start over. Sometimes rebooting a computer clears up the problem entirely, because it may be something where like the buffer memory is bad, your cache is overflowed. You restart it, clears the RAM out, and you can get going and possibly start that process over again, especially if it's a case where you start it, it works fine, and then it gets more and more bogged down as you go and eventually freezes. You may have to do multiple restarts to get back to the beginning to work your troubleshooting steps before the system slows down to where you're not able to function. Julian, that entirely depends on the mechanic. Much like mechanics, IT, there can be some bad apples in there, just like there are some bad apples with mechanics. Which is why, what happens when you find a good mechanic? You start taking all of your cars there and you start recommending your friends. So here's somebody I found. They're straight up with you. They're not going to try to, gouge you for more money. They're not going to try to upcharge you or upsell you something insane. They fix whatever problem you have and they get you back on the road. So over time, mechanics or IT professionals that operate like that, they don't stick around because you develop that reputation. Because if you get a really bad mechanic, what do? Yelp, Google reviews, tell everybody you know, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I mean, you start blasting it out of the world. Hey, this person scammed me. So in general, it's best to operate on the up and up. And over time, it pays off. All right, step number 4, plan your solution, like what it is you need to do. Is it replace the power supply? Is it, on a laptop, replace the keyboard, replace the monitor, something like that? You plan out your solution. Do you have the supplies on hand that you need? Do you need to order supplies? So you need to set a plan for what it is you're actually planning on doing. If it's not a hardware solution, if it's a software solution, is it something that's going to require me to re-image the drive? Or do I just need to do some end user education and say, hey, don't click that button? Or if you do click that button, don't confirm you click that button when it asks you, are you sure you want to do this? So you plan your solution and then you go ahead and you fix the problem once you have all the materials or everything you need to complete that task. So step 4. So step 1, identify the problem. Step 2, form a hypothesis or establish a theory. Step 3, test your theory. Step 4, plan your solution and fix the problem. So rule 12, use the least invasive solution first. Doing a restart versus re-imaging the drive. So restart may solve it. Re-imaging the drive also may solve it, but at a higher cost to the customer, both monetarily and probably with their data as well. Rule 13, know your starting point. If you're not the first person working on this task, you need to look back through the notes of the tech that came before you and see what options, what were their theories, what were their potential solutions, and work through that process that they did. And then you know your starting point where you can start working on this task. Also, creating a baseline, understanding how well the computer is operating right now. So sometimes they'll just say, my computer's acting sluggish. Well, what does sluggish mean? So we can find out what the baseline is now, check the baseline when we're done, and then we know if we've made progress. You know, so like if it's an internet slowness, you can do speed tests on the internet, check your reset your routers, reestablish your connections, and see if that cleans up your connection and you're getting a much higher connection speed. So all of this will help you, 1, determine where the problem is, 2, gives you a starting point to work from. 5th step, unfortunately, one of the most forgotten with regards to tech support, verify functionality. Make sure what you did fixed the problem, verify it, and take preventative action, especially if it is user error. Diplomatically and nicely explain to them, this happened because you did this. So in the future, either don't do this, or maybe this is the way you should approach it. Take a few minutes for end user education. More important in an enterprise environment than, say, a help desk where you're having, just individuals like personal computers calling in. So verify functionality to take preventative action. If it's something where they got some malware after you've remediated it, then you would set up malware to do active scanning, regular scans, stuff like that, to try to prevent it from happening in the future. And lastly, document your findings. To a large degree, this is your toolbox. You find a way to solve a complex problem, especially if it's one that does not come up that often. You document what the process you went through, what solutions actually worked, how you came to those conclusions. You document this. You're going to have internal documentation with the company, and you may have your own personal documentation too for extremely complex ones that are not necessarily for proprietary systems. It may just be you found a way to, get around the problem from a recent update with Apple or Mac OS or what have you. So documenting your findings allows people behind you to learn, and it also allows you to remember if this problem doesn't come up for the next 2 years, but then it shows up again and you've solved it before, but you can't remember what you did. Your documentation will remind you. So always, always document findings. All right. So Adam is panicking that his computer stops working. He calls tech support for help. You're tech support, and you must help Adam. So first, needs help. Identify the problem. What could be some possible reasons why his computer just stopped working? Everybody at once. It won't turn on. What are some possible problems?
It's not plugged in.
It's not plugged
Wires,
in.
wires are loose.
Wires loose. What else could it be?
He's not pressing the power button.
I could do it too. That's user error right there. It's always on when I get here. Power
Software
supply
failure.
issue. Sorry, what was that?
Software failure.
I mean, if you're not getting any power whatsoever, possibly not a software, but if you're starting to boot and then crashing, still likely would be hardware, but there's other stuff that could be going on. Switch could be off. There's beans in there. There you go. So the computer is not working. Why? We want to go through this process. Establish a theory of probable cause. Cleaners came in last night, vacuumed the whole office because we have corporate coming down. And ever since then, Steve's computer didn't work. So likely they probably moved the tower if it was sitting on the floor, or in their rush to get everything vacuumed, they bumped power cords. Maybe they even turned off the UPS. Didn't realize it. Test your theory. Check the plugs. Make sure everything's plugged in. Look at your UPS. Make sure it's turned on. Make sure everything's functioning. If they unplug things to move on a UPS, it depends which side you plug in if you'll have the actual power supply. I learned this one recently because I had my computer for years plugged into the wrong side of the UPS. And then when I finally needed it in the power flash, guess what? It did nothing for me. All right. So you'd follow up with this, Adam. Can you please check your cable from the computer to the outlet? If it is connected, try connecting it to another outlet. Verify that it is not the actual outlet itself. So Adam says, give me a minute. I will check. He said it was connected and switched the socket to a different outlet. He tries turning on the computer and notice his computer is now powering up. Whew. Now out of our hands, what do we need to do? Probably call maintenance. Verify the problem has been resolved. Tech support, ask Adam if everything is working, and he will reply with yes. Tech support stayed a bit longer to ensure everything is working, just in case. Make sure he's able to power up applications, get running, so that we don't have to receive that very angry second phone call if things weren't fixed. Lastly, document the results. Say maintenance needs to come in and replace the outlet and or breaker is thrown. Follow-up should be done just to check the faulty outlet, make sure the repairs have been completed there. And voila, we have worked our way through the problem. Not all of them are that easy, obviously, but many are. I mean, it will blow your mind how often it's something very, very simple. And you're going to have people on the other side going, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed I had to call you for this. And you just got to be gracious about it. Like, hey, happens all the time. Don't worry about it. I've done it myself. You know, you don't want them walking away embarrassed. You know, just let them know we are human. We do make mistakes. It does happen. That's part of the reason why we tell you at the beginning of this class, get comfortable with getting your answers wrong. Get comfortable with making mistakes. We are going to do that here quite often. You know, we're going to answer questions incorrectly. We're going to, stumble on the labs, all this kind of stuff. And we don't mind if we get it wrong here 50, 100 times, so long as when we walk out of here or we sit for that exam, that's when we get it correct. Because getting it wrong is a real good teacher. You tend to remember the things you got wrong rather than the things that came to you very easily and you just got it right. So here is basically the logic map for it. So, it's broken. Step 1, identify the problem, establish your theory, test your theory. You get down to it, evaluate those results. If it's not working, you kick back up to establish another theory. You can have a recursive loop here where it just kind of keeps going back there to establish a theory until you can isolate it. Although, depending on time scenarios, you may only allow for 5 or 6 minutes for this loop to continue happening before you hand it off to second tier, or you get some extra help so that you don't have a customer on the line for 3 hours trying to solve a problem. We want to try to get them taken care of as quickly as possible. And that's where the persistence comes up, where you follow up and find out what it was that was stumping you with that problem and how you would fix it next time. Once we have the set right, or the problem correctly, we establish a plan of action, implement our plan, verify our functionality, and then document our findings. Okay, Susan, can you please read for us?
As a professional, you are working on a computer that will not produce audio. You have already interviewed the client and learned the following. The audio stopped working 3 weeks ago. It was working and then suddenly stopped. The client hasn't seen any error messages. The client hasn't made any updates or changes to their machine. The data on the machine was backed up an hour ago.
So, identify the problem, audio is not working. Establish a theory. What might we look for first if we have this situation? What would be the least invasive thing we would check first? Yes, Cynthia.
If the speakers are connected to the computer.
Okay, what if they
cables are in, they're snugged in.
Okay, what if the client does not have external speakers?
Make sure it's not on mute.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yep.
So they might have accidentally hit the mute toggle button on the keyboard, right? So that would be probably one of the first places we would check. Audio settings, or toggling on and off on the keyboard and see if that fixes it. So possible solutions, we got 2 of them right off the bat. Audio's on mute, speakers unplugged. A virus has infected the system. That is a possibility, but that's a little more of an invasive issue. Bad installation of your sound driver. Configuration problem with the sound card, if they actually have a sound card, rather than an integrated one on the motherboard. Or simply a problem of compatibility between operating system and the sound device that they are currently using. So this is where these fun questions come in. Has anything changed? Like, did they install new speakers and then they just weren't working? Did they install a sound card and all of a sudden things were working? So we want to find out, has anything changed? Because that can lead you to so many solutions. Yes, Cynthia.
Sorry, I should have taken my hand down.
Oh, no problem. Not a problem. All right. I do highly encourage you making flashcards, remembering the steps of troubleshooting. I promise you, it comes up in 1001 and 1002. And also, you're going to need this to kind of help create your own troubleshooting methodology, because over time, you're going to, create your own way of moving through these steps. You're going to modify some of these rules because it'll be easier for you. And the thing is I think it was like rule 1 or 2, you need to approach these problems systematically. Do the same thing every time. That way you don't miss things. Over time, some of this stuff may, like the steps may kind of blend together because you work through them around the same time, like establishing a theory and then planning and implementing solution. Those 2 steps can work almost simultaneously. But at first, you're going to be doing this very methodically. You're going to be like, okay, step 1, work your part through step 1. Step 2, work your way through step 2. And you're going to be doing this very methodically. Over time, it's going to become a lot more natural, and you're going to flow through this process a lot quicker, but you need to be consistent with how you move through these steps. Especially for the A+, they love asking questions about the troubleshooting, the steps for troubleshooting. So please make some flashcards, go through them. You'll hear us mention them here quite a lot, as well as it does come up on the Jam boards, which we will start using more and more of. So questions, comments, concerns?